Hi. So a while ago, I read Mohsin Hamid's Exit West. I will confess it was the beautiful cover design that attracted me, and I'm so glad it did because I am in awe. The story is about a couple, Saeed and Nadia, who live in a terrifying time in Pakistan, with militants and raids and beheadings. Then they hear about these doors leading to random destinations. You go through a door that until yesterday was an ordinary door, and you come out in Mykonos or San Francisco. So they find such a door. They go through it, and the rest of the story is my favorite subject: survival and change, and where it leads us. So I'm going to now go through the book and read out my absolute favorite quotes. I hope you enjoy them as much as I did. It might seem odd that in cities teetering at the edge of the abyss, young people still go to class. But that is the way of things, with cities as with life. For one moment, we are pottering about our errands as usual, and the next, we are dying. And our eternally impending ending does not put a stop to our transient beginnings and middles until the instant when it does. Nadia would never be able to determine what had become of them, but she always hoped that they had found a way to depart unharmed, abandoning the city to the predations of warriors on both sides, who seemed content to flatten it in order to possess it. Said's father wept only when he was alone in his room, silently, without tears. His body seized as though by a stutter or a shiver that would not let go, for his sense of loss was boundless, and his sense of the benevolence of the universe was shaken, and his wife had been his best friend. What he did not say was that he had come to that point in a parent's life when, if a flood arrives, one knows one must let go of one's child, contrary to all the instincts one had when one was younger, because holding on can no longer offer the child protection. It can only pull the child down and threaten them with drowning, for the child is now stronger than the parent. And so, by making the promise he demanded she make, she was, in a sense, killing him. But that is the way of things, for when we migrate, we murder from our lives those who we leave behind. In this group, everyone was foreign, and so, in a sense, no one was. They slept on the slender single bed together without speaking, without touching, or without touching more than the cramped space demanded. For this one night, not unlike a couple that was long and unhappily married, a couple that made out of opportunities for joy misery. Nadia, too, noticed a friction between them. She was uncertain what to do to disarm the cycles of annoyance they seemed to be entering into with one another, since once begun, such cycles are difficult to break. In fact, the opposite, as if each makes the threshold for irritation next time a little bit lower, as is the case with certain allergies. Mention of their love had made Saeed and Nadia a bit uncomfortable, for they had not been very romantic of late, each still perceiving the grating of their presence on the other. And they put this down to being too long in too close proximity, a state of unnatural nearness in which any relationship would suffer. They began to wander separately during the day, and this separation came as a relief to them. Instead, she watched him, and he looked at her, and he saw her animal form, the strangeness of her face and her body, and she saw the strangeness of his. And when he reached for her, she came to him though she moved slightly away. But then around her, she saw all these people of all these different colors in all these different attires, and she was relieved. Better here than there, she thought. And it occurred to her that she had been stifled in the place of her birth for virtually her entire life, that its time for her had passed, and a new time was here. Nadia said once again that the natives were so frightened that they could do anything. I can understand it, she said. Imagine if you lived here and millions of people from all over the world suddenly arrived. Millions arrived in our country, Said replied, when there were wars nearby. That was different. Our country was poor. We didn't feel we had as much to lose. She felt herself touched by guilt from time to time, although she was unsure what precisely was making her guilty. All she knew was that when the feeling came, it was a relief for her to be away from Said, or work on their separate work sites. A relief unless she thought about it. Thought about being relieved not to be with him, because when she thought about this, the guilt was usually not too far behind. In that instant, Said was reminded of those soldiers he had seen in the city of his birth, returning on leave from battle, who, when you pestered them for stories about where they had been and what they had done, looked at you as if you had no idea how much you were asking. That they were ashamed and that they did not yet know that shame, for the displaced, was a common feeling, and that there was, therefore, no particular shame in being ashamed. Every time a couple moves, they begin, if their attention is still drawn to one another, to see each other differently. For personalities are not a single immutable color, like white or blue, but rather illuminated screens, and the shades we reflect depend much on what is around us. It seemed to Nadia that the farther they moved from the city of their birth, through space and through time, the more he sought to strengthen his connection to it, tying ropes to the air of an era that for her was unambiguously gone. Saeed wanted to feel for Nadia what he had always felt for Nadia, and the potential loss of this feeling left him unmoored, adrift in a world where one could go anywhere but still find nothing. Saeed made it a point to smile with Nadia, at least sometimes, and he hoped that she would feel something warm and caring when he smiled. But what she felt was sorrow, and the sense that they were better than this, and that together they had to find a way out. And thus, in the end, their relationship did, in some senses, come to resemble that of siblings, in that friendship was its strongest element. And unlike many passions, theirs managed to cool slowly, without curdling into its reverse, anger, except intermittently. Of this, in later years, both were glad. And both would also wonder if this meant that they had made a mistake, that if they had but waited and watched, their relationship would have flowered again. And so their memories took on potential, which is, of course, how our greatest nostalgias are born. The couple that was uncoupling did argue, but mostly they granted each other more space, a process that had been ongoing for quite a while. And if there was sorrow and alarm in this, there was relief too, and the relief was stronger. There was also closeness, for the end of a couple is like a death, and the notion of death, of temporariness, can remind us of the value of things, which it did for Saeed and Nadia. And so even though they spoke less and did less together, they saw each other more, although not more often. And when she went out, it seemed to her that she too had migrated. That everyone migrates even if we stay in the same houses our whole lives, because we can't help it. We are all migrants through time. Nadia, too, felt both comforted and discomforted by this physical intimacy. And she said that no, she wanted to be the one to leave if one of them left. And she likewise detected an untruth in her words, for she knew the matter was not one of if, but of when, and that when would be soon. Days passed before they discussed it again. And as they discussed it, Nadia was already packing her things into a backpack and a satchel. And so their discussion of her departure was not, as it pretended to be, a discussion of her departure, but a navigation through words that said otherwise of their fear of what would come next. And they looked at each other, sympathetic looks, for time had done what time does, but looks of particular recognition. And they watched the young people of this city pass, young people who had no idea how bad things once were, except what they studied in history, which was, perhaps, as it should be. And they sipped their coffees, and they spoke. For they were former lovers, and they had not wounded each other so deeply as to have lost their ability to find a rhythm together. Thank you for watching, and tell me in the comments which quote was your favorite, and which book you would like me to do next.